Episode 6 reveals that Klein isn't just walking his own path. You see, something far beyond him has already nudged his destiny off course, and only his teacher, Mr. Azik, had the insight and the power to notice it, right? And the episode titled Teacher, Every Life Has Its Beginning, does indeed refer to Klein's teacher, Mr. Azik. And Azik is a man whose life is shrouded in fog, and I'm talking no memory, no clear direction, or no past. You know, depression eats away at the man, but yet behind that sorrow lies a power so mysterious and deep, it even unsettles Klein whenever he gets a glimpse of that power. And with that power, Azik sees something terrifying. Klein's fate is out of balance. So then, what does it mean when fate is out of balance? Well, it can mean three things. Number one, conflict and misalignment. Klein's choices, his path, or circumstances don't align with what's meant for him. You see, his destiny in itself and his actions are pulling in another direction. And secondly, is duality and interference, which could also mean it's as if there are two threads of fate wrapped around him. One being force in this case, right? And the other one being his natural own. So something outside is trying to bend his destiny towards falsehood. And thirdly, it could be a warning, an omen. His fate flows unnaturally, right? The distortion could mean corruption or danger or influence from powers far beyond his control. But before we can see if this is really the case, how did we get to this point? Well, let's start with how the Nighthawks got their new mission, right? Elizabeth, a close friend of Melissa Moriarty, has come to the Divination Club to seek the help of a divination expert. She chose Klein in this case, but why him? Why? What's her backstory? Why is she so familiar? Well, for one, Elizabeth and Selena have a history of being mystical enthusiasts, and this hobby has made them no strangers to the Divination Club, right? They come and go as they please, especially Selena, who in the past has gone even further to practice these things, which puts us at the first encounter between Klein and Elizabeth in episode 4 at the Divination Club. Remember that passing nod that they had between themselves? And then they meet again at Selena's birthday party. But just to add on the topic of them meeting, from the novel, their actual first encounter was actually at the underground market, right? Elizabeth was actually there looking for a birthday present for Selena. And we know Klein and Oatmeal were there shopping for mystical materials, cheaply made amulets. And in episode 5, evidence of this is that Klein would remake these materials to create amulets and for both Melissa and Benson. So, having seen Klein's excellent choices in choosing materials, she would ask him to help her pick out a gift for Selena. Now, Klein, being a gentleman and all, accepts her request, so he prompts her on what her friend might like and what are their interests. Now, she answers that they're both mystical enthusiasts and she's thinking of getting a gift in this domain. So she tells her, okay, to choose an amulet as a gift. And then from there, in between their dialogue, he would also drop in some extra mystical knowledge, as they were shopping around for amulets. So I'm just going to go over the dialogue that happened between Klein and Elizabeth as they were choosing an amulet. So Klein greeted Elizabeth with a polite smile, gentlemanly smile, before explaining the nature of protective amulets. Each type, he told her, served a different purpose. Some to avert disasters, some to prevent illnesses, and others to bring fortune, right? But such distinctions weren't simple. Different requirements drew power from different gods. And that's the part that the enemy skipped, each linked to their own constellation, and then from there, each constellation required specific materials. For instance, he elaborated an amulet designed to avert disasters would naturally belong to the Empress of Disaster and Horror, none other than the Evernight Goddess herself, as her divine symbol was the moon. The corresponding metal would have to be pure silver in this case. Therefore, an amulet crafted for disaster aversion was most effective when made of silver and etched with the correct incantation. Now, Klein thought privately, the incantations themselves had to be perfect, written in the proper language with the correct symbols, proportions, and ritualistic alignment. But that was too complex for Elizabeth to concern herself with, so he kept those details to himself. Elizabeth's eyes, right, lit up with curiosity, though a flicker of doubt passed through her. She asked whether a devout follower of one god could wear the amulet of another god. This is a really relevant question. Now you see, Klein reassured her that this was no problem. The gods themselves paid little attention to such minor matters. What truly mattered was not the wearer, but the maker. You see, a devout follower of the Lord of Storms, right, attempting to craft an amulet under the eternal blazing sun, for example, now, would most certainly invite something dangerous. But unless the ritual magic was directly involved, such risks were negligible. And you see, from there, relieved, Elizabeth exhaled softly. That small reaction right there, once I read it, it alone revealed the strength she had in the Evernight Goddess, telling us in what religion she believed in. So, gathering her courage, she then explained her true intent. She wished to obtain an amulet of health for Selene, and wanted Klein's advice on which deity would be the best choice, whether the eternal blazing sun, Earth Mother, or the god of knowledge and wisdom. So Klein considered the question before answering. You see, both the eternal blazing sun and Earth Mother were suitable to fulfill the requirement. The sun, he explained with another smile, was naturally represented by gold, while the brown star, right, associated with Earth Mother, corresponding to lead. Then, with a touch of humor, he suggested that the sun would indeed be preferable, but also gently hinted that Elizabeth should first make sure she had brought enough money with her, because those things are crazy. So here, to actually create charms and amulets from the sun pathway, you'd have to be really, really wealthy and rich. I mean, to use gold in crafting, I don't know if it's just me, but that's expensive. And in the Lord of the Mystery, using these charms is akin to burning money. Now you see, Klein's earlier suggestion hadn't been random, right? The one that he picked out, the sun charm. Among the three amulets that they were reviewing, they all displayed a faint glimmer with spiritual resonance. Now, Klein is the only one who could see this spiritual resonance, him being beyonder. He had noticed that one in particular, a health charm aligned with the domain of the sun. And Elizabeth, who could not see the spiritual resonance, seemed to have made a realization and wanting to voice it. So after a thoughtful pause, she turned back to Klein with a more practical question. She asked, so once the material of the amulet was chosen, she wondered how could one distinguish the proper incantation and corresponding symbols on it. Now Klein responded with a simple counter question. Did she know the ancient language Hermes? Her cheeks colored slightly as she admitted she had only just begun to study it recently. Now, why is that language important? Well, you see, among several languages in the book, right, in the story, the ancient language Hermes also had the ability to invoke the powers of nature, mysticism in this case, right? So it had the power to help you to inscribe these symbols and incantations on those very materials. But anyway, and that's how the actual first encounter went down, right? And remember, on the day of Selena's birthday party, she would come to know that he was actually indeed Melissa's brother. In the novel, because he had once helped her pick out an amulet for Selena and also helped resolve Selena's magic mirror incident with her assistance, right? Selena, remember, was safe from the magic mirror fiend. So his act of always claiming just to be a simple mystica aficionado would crumble from that point forward. She would see Klein as a true mystica expert from that point onwards. Now, just to give you a quick update on Selena, right? What happened to her after that incident? She, in particular, would cut down on her ventures in mysticism. And Elizabeth has come to know what the dangers of mysticism can bring. She would act as a safeguard to move their group away from possible mysticism ventures in the future. So then you see, Klein didn't find it so bad if she saw him as a mystical expert, right? Because she would keep Melissa safe in his stead in the future. But he would also try to avoid his sister's group of friends from that point on. Unfortunately for him, in the future, on one of his days visiting the divination club, Klein would have another chance encounter with her again, which brings us to episode 6. She would come to the club seeking an expert, and she saw Klein's name on the club registry. So you see, as Klein entered the divination, right, he was caught off guard, and this is how the meeting unfolded. right? With a bit of surprise. Mr. Moriarty, it really is you. I had a feeling when I saw the name, but I wasn't really sure. And Klein gave a helpless shrug like, well, I am a mysticism enthusiast after all. Just don't tell Melissa or Selena. Internally, he sighed. The divination said it was a good day to go to the club, so we know that Klein does a divination, right? Every time he divines if he should go to the club today. So why on earth did I have to bump into Elizabeth of all people? Shaking his head, he pushed the door open to the red agate room, right? Casually clicking his left molar twice. Remember that motion is to activate the spirit vision. They stepped inside, and then Klein settled in the diviner's seat. He lifted his gaze, he looked directly at Elizabeth, right? His brows immediately furrowed. Her energy field was tinged with a sickly green, right? Classic symptom of being haunted by spirits or rats. So keeping his expression calm for her sake, he asked, have you been having nightmares recently? Repetitive ones? Elizabeth, who was still locking the door behind her, froze mid-motion. It took her a while to finally admit that yes, that's exactly why I've been looking for you. Leaning back, Klein continued, what kind of dreams and when did it start? It began during the last days of my vacation in Lombard Town. Our family has an estate there. Elizabeth carried the detailed oriented and sharpness of a mystical hobbyist, right? An enthusiast who knew that these things mattered, so she had to speak them in detail. In the dream, I always run into a knight in full black armor. He carries this massive broadsword on his shoulder, and his face is hidden behind a helmet. And the only thing I can see are these glowing red eyes, and every time he tries to get closer to me, I run, but somehow, and each time he gets closer than before. And Klein thought for a moment before asking, so a few days before these dreams started, did you come into contact with any antiques, ruins, I'm talking burial objects, or maybe old mausoleums? And Elizabeth hesitated, then recalled, I visited a mountain near Lumbertown. There was an abandoned castle there. Well, that's straight out of a paranormal novel. Klein couldn't help looking inwardly. Still, he pressed on. Did you leave anything behind at the castle or take anything from it? And Elizabeth frowned, trying to recall, and after a pause, she admitted, I did get scratched by some tree branches, right? I bled a little, thus leaving blood count. And Klein nodded gravely. Yes indeed. Her face immediately tightened with worry, her words spilling out even faster. Then, can you divine the reason, or maybe do you have a way to solve this? Divination isn't all that neat, Klein complained in his head. At best, it gives symbolic hints in the general direction. But of course, you're in luck. I'm not your run-of-the-mill seer. I actually know what I'm doing. Putting on his professional mask, he said solemnly, since this involves dreams, we'll use a similar dream divination method. Alright. And Elizabeth agreed quickly, nodding her head like a hungry woodpecker. And Klein kept his tone steady. You'll need to sleep here, right? Let that dream present itself. Is that going to be a problem? Elizabeth parsed her lips, but answered without hesitation. No problem at all. I trust you completely. We all know, or if you didn't know, all nighthawks in the field must report a case involving supernatural incidents. It doesn't matter how small you report it, that is standard protocol. Now, naturally, Klein would report this case as well, right? Which is the wrath harassment Elizabeth is facing in her dreams, right? From Limber Town. Thus, we enter the scene of the Nighthawks entering the Limber Castle. And might I just comment here, like that battle that's about to take place in that ruin was stupendously beautiful. Stupendously beautiful. Some trivial news, or that you might not know, knowledge you might not have known, is that whenever you go as a three-man team, right? In this case, Klein, Dun, and Frey, and also in the future, whenever there is a three-man team and no less than three, they are allowed to request the use of a sealed artifact, right, that they have clearance for, which in this case was sealed artifact 3-0782. About that artifact, right, it had the ability to constantly purify any corpses and spirits in a 15-meter radius. However, it also had the drawback of purifying the souls of commoners at the same time. Now, research data indicates that if humans were to stand within its radius for an hour, they would become an idiot, only knowing how to praise the sun. Anyway, yeah, the limit for beyond this is 6 hours. Now, it was originally from the Inter Republic, right, belonging to the Eternal Blazing Sun Church, but now belongs to the Evernight Church. Remember, the Eternal Blazing Sun Church has a headquarters in the Intis Republic. It only has a branch in Tingent City, right where we are. The headquarters of the Evernight Church is in Beckland. But anyway, so its original name that it went by was the Mutated Sun Sacred Ember. If you didn't know, now you know. So, own thoughts now. Own thoughts. Honestly, I found that whole battle pretty fun to watch. Honestly. But if I had one thing to nitpick about, right, it's the moment when Klein got smacked in the face by that giant broadsword. Both he and the Wrath got dragged into the same dream space. Now, here's why that matters. You see, Din's dream powers don't just work on a simple one-to-one basis, right? They operate like a radius. He creates the dream and pulls multiple people into it, and that raises some interesting questions and discussions. Does Din's dream actually last longer or get stronger the more people he has inside it? Because logically, if it were just Dun and the target, the target might catch on much faster that they're in the dream and break free if they're powerful enough. But if multiple people are inside, the dream might feel more real, more stable, which, if true, is honestly a really cool mechanic. Frey should also have been in the dream as he shouted to Klein as Klein was making that dash. Now, on top of that, Dun wasn't just using the base ability, right? If I'm thinking about it, he was using dream shaping. Now, this is the ability to literally influence behavior inside a dream, right? Make someone more talkative, more reckless, reveal their innermost secrets. What I'm getting at, basically, you're more you when you're inside a dream. And we've seen this play out before with Elizabeth. Going back to the novel, Klein noticed how much more chatty she was and open she was compared to her waking self. So this is just how it went down. So Klein just entered the dream, right, to investigate. It went something like this. Mr. Moriarty, we meet again. I had suspected that the Klein on the name register was you when Selena and I came to get a divination. I came multiple times, but I always missed you as I had to attend classes during the day. When I was free during the summer break, I was dragged to the holidays at Limit Town by my parents. So now you see that divination Klein does every time when he wants to go to the divination club. He always misses them. It's intentional. You can help me, right? Now, Klein froze at this moment when he heard the girl's talkativeness. To think Elizabeth had suspected that I was working part-time at the divination club and tried to find me on multiple occasions. Yet, she didn't appear like this when she was awake. Yeah, indeed, everyone's dream shows their innermost self. That's proof there. So, looping back to the fight, right? Klein making that straightforward dash for the sun emblem could have been a slip of judgment. Sure. I'll give you that. But I think it's more likely that, Din's dream shaping was in effect there. See what I'm getting at? Same for the Wrath suddenly turning its attention to Klein. It locked onto him because, Klein basically exposed himself as easy prey, and these night-type enemies, once they see an opening, they commit all the way. Now, as a book reader, I know this raises some contradiction. Technically, Klein is blessed with a higher power that shields him from dream manipulation. We know this. He shouldn't have been fully affected like that, right? But he can still be pulled into dreams, as we saw way back when in episode 1, right? When the Nighthawks came to visit him to investigate the deaths of his friends, right? And they wanted to take him to a psychic expert. And Dun placed Klein under a dream and messed with his emotions, right? And what the emotions told Klein was to run out of town. He was scared, he was making a break for it. That's example number 1. And number 2 is with Madame Bailey when she investigated in Klein's dream. So that's an example he can be placed under a dream. So yeah, adaptation liberties, some mechanics were simplified, some details dropped. The line between what's canon versus adaptation, it can be a little bit funny, blurry, so you just have to interpret it for yourself. But either way, regardless of it, it made the fight more dynamic, right? Once you see it this way. And I don't really mind. My only lingering question was, how exactly did Din snag that sun emblem and finish off the Wrath outside the dream? That part's still a mystery to me. At the conclusion of the battle, right, the Nighthawks agree the Wrath they fought was not a natural one. No, Its obsession was far too deep, and more glaringly, like the folklore, the history, surrounding the ancient castle never mentioned once anything about rats. We're shown just how decrepit the place has become. The grand halls are littered with collapsed stone pillars, moss clinging to the walls, spiderwebs stretched across the ruins. From this, the Nighthawks reasoned that the wrath was not bound here for centuries, but had only come into existence only recently. Their suspicion grows when they uncover a half-buried portrait behind the rubble. The artwork style points to the Fourth Epoch, an era more than 1,000 years in the past. And what an era it was! It was during the Fourth Epoch the gods still walked openly among mortals, performing miracles as natural as breathing. Countless deities ascended during this time, while just as many perished in wars and upheavals. The root of many present-day secret organizations, such as the Moses Ascetic Order and Secret Order and the Demoness Sect, right, can all be traced back to that age. It was a period that feels less like history and more like legend. That's how epic it was. The Nighthawks, right, conclude that the figure in the portrait must have been the castle's first owner. But you see, Klein sees more. To his eyes, the resemblance, the uncanny, you see the face, the same bearing, even the same subtle mole under the ear. It looks like his mentor, Mr. Azik. And so we're given our first clue about him, our first confirmation. Mr. Azik's existence stretches back 1,000 years. Wow, into an era long vanished. He isn't merely a mysterious man now. He is a survivor of a bygone age. Hold on to that thought. I'm coming back to it. The team decides to remain at the castle a while longer in case more wraths show up. After all, their kind are drawn back by resentment. So Klein takes the first shift, guarding the sun emblem, but he isn't content by simply stand and watch. He wants to know more about it. And according to the official Nighthawks records, the sun emblem's origin are unknown, a vague answer but telling in its own way. Perhaps, the reason the emblem resisted divination wasn't ignorance but interference. Protection so high level that even official channels could not pierce through them. So Klein, ever cautious and clever, makes the decision to divine the emblem, but not here, not in the open, but in the sanctuary of the Great Fog, where outside interference cannot reach. And when he does, something wholly unexpected occurs. In the boundless void of the dream, right, Klein finds himself standing face to face with the literal expanse of a void. And out of the void pops out a huge, gigantic sun. Pure, blinding light suddenly flared, gold and flames sweeping outward like a tidal wave. Boom! Klein was instantly kicked out of his dream world. The backlash slammed him sideways onto the ground. His body trembled with pain. It felt like he had literally turned into a bonfire, his insides burning as though they were consumed by raging flames. Rumble. Above the mysterious space of the Great Fog, it shook violently. The majestic palace cracked and collapsed inch by inch, and even the massive bronze table shattered apart. You see, the flames engulfed Klein, but the fog surged in, smothering the fire like water from a hose. Klein, shaken and gasping, thought, what the hell just happened? Did my divination actually brush against something way out of my league? He managed to steady himself, letting the pain and charred feelings fade. If it wasn't for the mysterious space protecting me, there wouldn't even be ashes left. Could that golden drop have been God's blood? Did I just come face to face with the eternal blazing sun? Or maybe one of his angels? No, that was the sun itself. Damn, I seriously just looked at God. You see, then comes that classic moment, right? With a bitter sigh, he muttered to himself, alright, new rule. Never casually divine anything that might be linked to a high-level existence. And while I'm at it, don't just throw open my spirit vision whenever I feel like it. One wrong glance at something that I shouldn't be looking at, and it's game over. There, in the real world. One wrong glance that shouldn't be looked at, and it's game over. I don't even have the Great Fog to shield me. So let's pause right here, right? That line's important, so just keep that at the back of your mind. We'll circle right back to it later. But then, just when Klein thought the worst had passed, something else hit him, right? Bits of knowledge started echoing in his head like someone had just bumped secrets straight into his brain. And when we look closer at what he remembered, this is what we get. Don't look at God directly. Pure white angel, a technique to craft flaring sun charms, a high-level item in the sun domain. It can last up to a year before decaying. No ritual required though. You just need to swap it out with sealed artifact 30782. See, that's the substitute for a ritual. The item itself siphons power from the mutated sun signet emblem. And number 4, extremely hostile towards the Lord of Storms and God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Number 5, the Bard Potion formula. Now you see, many fans praise this episode for its pacing, right, and high production value, especially the way it illustrated the eternal blazing sun, just for that moment. The knowledge Klein absorbed was all from the sun domain. And here's the thing, because a god is the pinnacle of their domain, they aren't just rulers of it, right? They are the very concept itself. So when you try to look at them or even brush up against their presence, there's always going to be backlash. For the sun domain, imagine standing on the edge of a star right as it goes supernova. The blast doesn't just burn you, it erases you. Your body, your mind, everything down to the tiniest atom should be gone in that instant. The explosion, right, expands, the heat sears you, and that shockwave shakes you to your core. And yet, if by some miracle you survive, what you take back with you are fragments, right? Impossible light, patterns no human eye was ever meant to see. Most of it is madness, like incomprehensible. But a few shards stick, and those shards take root as knowledge, a survivor's reward, if you will, for peeking into an unfathomable and somehow living. That's Klein's situation. For him, glazing at a god was like watching a supernova from arm's length. He should have been obliterated. But the grey fog protected him, letting him endure trauma and walk away with something more, a warning and a reward. From what he pieces together, the revelation were all connected to the sun pathway. For example, White Angel, that's not just a paid title. No. It's a rank given to sequence 1 in the sun pathway. So you see, Klein even learned a high level potion formula from that experience. He can't use it himself, obviously, he's a seer after all, but just having it as a massive achievement, right? In the Lord of the Mists, potion formulas at that level are usually guarded as like national treasures by the churches. The fact that Klein, at his relatively low rank, holds one, that's huge. Something you could even trade for, unimaginable value. On top of that, he's also picked up methods to craft charms of the sun domain. Dangerous knowledge, yes, but it means if he can safely exploit that divine blood again, he can add some serious powerful tools to his arsenal. What we know about the sun pathway, right? The sun pathway is something truly unique in this world. Fitting so, since it governs purification. It's not just about fire and light, but also about everything those ideas represent at their deepest level. When we think about the sun pathway, its abilities read like a hymen to order and brilliance. You get your bardic songs, voices that inspire, uplift, and even command through resonance. Then you get your fire and your light manipulation, raw element control, destructive yet illuminating. Sun magic, miracles that draw directly from the concept of the sun itself. And then you have the notarization, the authority to declare truth, a divine kind of law-setting power. And then you have your purification, the ability to burn away corruption, disease, and even supernatural taint. And then following that is justice, standing as the living embodiment of fairness, divine judgment. Holiness is the next one, order and faith, the backbone of what the sun represents, stability, unity, and reverence. And lastly, inextinguishable light, a symbol of hope and radiance that cannot be put out no matter the darkness. So notice how broad these powers are, right? All from the sun domain. The sun pathway spans entire aspects of civilization itself. It embodies the fire that destroys, but also the light that guides, its warmth, its justice, its law, its cleansing, and at the highest level, something like absolute truth. And so with the wrath purified in the mystery of Limbit Castle behind them, Elizabeth should now sleep soundly. Her nightmares ended. The Nighthawks leave with a victory, but Klein, he leaves with something far more dangerous and precious: insight into God's domain. Next, we have an interesting world building knowledge card that we see, right? A nice transition. So what are those? So instead of focusing on characters to awkwardly dump history or explain powers mid-scene, which kills pacing, these little info cards slip in naturally, giving context in pause and between action, right? Think of it like what Attack on Titan did. The Odeon gear breakdown or Tyson classification. No character had to break immersion and sound like a narrator. Viewers just absorb the knowledge, right? So why use them in the Lord of Permissions? Why do we have them? They hook two types of fans for the series. One is like your casual viewers. They can skim over these cards and still follow the story just fine. And then you have your lore-hungry fans. They're the ones who pause screenshots and go discuss these things in details in forums. It's like a dual layer system. Stories stay smooth while lore deepens, fueling fandom engagement and theory crafting. I like that. So what does it say? What does the first epoch, the Age of Darkness, and then the second epoch, the Dark Epoch, really mean? Well, across time, this world has been mapped into 5 distinct epochs. Klein currently lives in the 5th, but let's zoom back a bit. The first epoch, the Age of Chaos, right? A time when madness reigned. Humans, animals, and monsters wrapped into cruel, irrational, bloodthirsty beings. And then from this, chaos came beyond the characteristics, seeding mutations like giants, elves, demons, dragons, feathered serpents, orcs, nagas, sea monsters, and rats. And then you get your second epoch, right? The Dark Epoch, humanity's darkest age. The sky, the seas, the lands were dominated by dragons, giants, elves, phoenixes, demonic wolves, sea races, and undead spirits. This was also when the ancient gods began to rise, with figures like the Giant King, Elf King contending for dominance. Giants, elves, vampires, and humans still existed as unified races, not yet fractured, right? And honestly, that's just scratching the surface. These first 2 epochs alone contain so much lore they could fill their own breakdown videos. For now, though, I'll leave you with this glimpse of chaos and the promise that the deeper we go, the stronger, the stranger it gets. And hey, if you've been enjoying the breakdown, please drop a like and consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive. I gotta ask, right, whenever you saw Mr. Azik on screen, did any of you feel something off about him? Like, in terms of character design, and I'm talking like the eyes in particular. Because whenever I saw him appear on screen, episode after episode, there was just something about him that I couldn't put into words. And then I went back to the novel, and then I read his character description, and then it made sense. I knew what it was. They wanted Azik's gaze to give this indescribable weight. Like you're looking into someone who's endured vicissitudes of countless lives. And when looking at the anime, they seem to have done it correctly. I don't know, but I feel like they've done it correctly. Now, shifting to the records of Hornacis, right, things get even stranger. These records answer some of Klein's questions, but also leave twice as many dangling. So picture this. A civilization living on the summit of a mountain so high, modern science calls it the death zone. That's the Hornacis Mountain, 6,000 meters above sea level, and at that altitude survival should be impossible. Yet the murals say otherwise, right? They say people lived there, they worshipped there, and most importantly, they also feared there. So then, who gave them the power or the strength to survive in the death zone? Perhaps their god, the ruler of Evernight, mother of the sky. That name sounds eerily familiar, yet not quite the same. And here's where it really gets chilling. Researchers uncovered no graves, none. Instead, tradition dictates that when a family member died, their body was kept inside the home, right? Laid on the bed, side by side with the living, for a whole 3 days. They believed that dead, right, would guard them during the night. So death wasn't an end here, it was seen as protection. So was this mother of the sky truly sustaining them in the clouds, or was she twisting the concept of life and death into something more terrifying? right? And without spoiling too much, I'll toss out a theory. So maybe her gift was the ability to open up a space where humans can survive, right? In a place where survival shouldn't exist. For example, breathing in thin air, resisting death at impossible heights. That might explain the name Mother of the Sky. But records add another unsettling details. They revered yet feared the darkness. Doesn't make sense. Her other title was the ruler of Evernight. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Evernight Goddess, know her honorific name, right? And I'm talking about that one line that says Mistress of Repose and Silence. The meaning there is a state of rest and sleep and tranquility. So here's the question. Is the ruler of Evernight the same being as the Evernight Goddess? Or something older? Something trying to usurp her mentor and claim her dominion over the Evernight's domain itself? Next up, we finally hit the theme of dissonance in Klein's fate, right? And who's there first to notice it? Azik. Remember that blood painting he did about the castle? The one Azik created in his dream state? When Klein sees it, Azik admits he could feel Klein had been there. Like, is there precedence for a claim like that? Absolutely. Mystically speaking, dreams aren't just random images, they're gateways. So let me break it down for you. Number one, symbolic language, right? Dreams communicate through imagery, symbols, and to understand them, you have to interpret, decode, and dig. I think this one is plainly obvious. And then you have inner exploration. They peel back the subconscious mind, right? Revealing hidden truths, fears, and even desires we don't admit to ourselves. And then the third is prophetic glimpses. You see, some dreams aren't just about past, present, they point forward, showing glimpses of what's to come. And then lastly, it's guidance and revelation. And perhaps this is the most important. You see, dreams can guide us, giving us insight and knowledge our waking mind doesn't have. And it's that last point we need to focus on, because Azik's first appearance opened with him saying, "Lately, I've been having strange dreams after waking up. I found that I've drawn this." Think about it. Episode 6, Azik is already showing signs of depression, disconnection, a man adrift in his own life with no memory of who he truly is. His conscious mind is empty, blank, nothing. But his dreams keep pressing forward, revealing pieces of truth he can't consciously access. See what I mean? So when Klein shows up and he sees the castle painting, his emotions surge and his whole body reacts with unprecedented tension. Klein doesn't even fully understand why, but Azik's dreams seem to touch something deep within Klein's fate. Whether Azik realizes it or not, the painting and the imbalance he senses in Klein isn't a coincidence. He takes it as a revelation. Now, after talking about that, we just need to point out the problem the episode has. So, Klein takes Azik to the castle, right? And then we have a nice backstory. The short backstory of Azik, done really nicely, right? I like it. But I've got to point out a weakness the showrunners introduced. Compared to the novel, this problem didn't exist there at all. Azik opens the coffin of his son and sees the head missing. He unleashes a wave of spiritual energy. Klein goes flying into a pillar, and suddenly the whole room is bathed in Azik's aura. Now, then out of nowhere, Klein starts seeing Azik's memory. Here's the issue. It shouldn't be possible. Viewing another person's dreams or memories has requirements, specific steps that need to be fulfilled. And none of these steps are present here. And remember, just a moment ago, Klein suffered a backlash from merely looking at a god. Whatever happened to don't look directly at God? Then, in the last episode, right, looked at the vestige of the true creator and suffered a backlash too, right? We know this. But here with Azik, nothing. So what am I saying? Am I saying Azik is a god? No, that's not what I'm saying. Recall what I said about Azik being from the Fourth Epoch, an era where God still roamed the earth. He has more than 1,000 years of memories. He's not fully in control of them currently. Missing memories, fragments surfacing randomly, and also, that deep depression that eats away at him. So, whenever he's wrought with emotions, memory could pop out unexpectedly. If we follow the example the showrunners are setting here, what happens when Klein sees something he shouldn't? That's the problem the show accidentally creates it. Now, in the novel, the whole scene was handled differently, completely differently. Azik simply told Klein his backstory about the castle, right? There was no memory viewing through spiritual energy. The shortcut in the adaptation broke the consistency of the rules. In the book, accessing dreams or memories was never that simple, and that complexity actually served as protection for low sequence beyond us. So then the next question becomes, how does it actually work, right? Accessing dreams. Well, beyond this can perform dreamwalking, but it requires intermediary steps, right? Nightmares like Dun can skip these steps, sure. But when it comes to seers, it's not automatic. You need to put the target to sleep using charms, sedatives, hallucinogens, weakening their spiritual defense. Then lock onto their spiritual signature, and then from there, you project your own spirit body into theirs. There's how dreamwalking is achieved. But here, Klein is forcefully made to watch Azik's dreams. And that, my friends, is why I call this a problem with the adaptation. And hey, if you've been enjoying the breakdown, please drop a like and consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive. Anyway, let's continue. So what have we learned? So what do we walk away with after all this, right? The dissonance in Klein's fate actually has a visual representation here. The feather here, right? The feather has popped up in some previous episodes and will also appear in the following episodes. Though in this episode in particular, Azik is not able to dive into the specifics of the mastermind's plan. All we know is that it's a powerful power the mastermind uses. It's so strong, all he feels are its presence around, right? And to what effect? Well, he can feel the power here. We can only wait and see, because Azik says he can feel the power here. But this time, not directly on Klein specifically, right? The next thing we walk away with is that Azik still hasn't regained all his memories, which means we're left in the dark about his true past. But what we do get is a glimpse into his situation. After how for instance, how every incarnation of his life carries both warmth and tragedy. At his best, he's a family man. His fondest memories show him smiling, his eyes gentle, filled with, I saw light in there, and happiness. But then at the casual flashback, it twists the picture. He's no longer smiling, his eyes turn cold, dangerous, he's a dangerous man. And then you have an army of the undead outside bowing to him, while inside his wife and child lie sick and helpless. So then comes the shocking choice. Azik abandons them. He kneels before his son's coffin, apologizing, believing his departure in the past would have somehow saved them. If this is a decision he reaches every incarnation, then maybe the real problem doesn't lie with Azik the man, but with Azik the power. Something hidden within his nature, his pathway, his very existence, that's forcing him into a tragic cycle again and again and again. And that right there might be the most chilling mystery of all.